one of the profound things that artists do is they lie all the time. And they lie in order to tell the truth. And this is a really, really good example of a strong, strong play written by a great playwright where she took a true story and she spun a story that had a deeper truth to it. And so the question I have is, how did you hear about the story, and why did you choose the story, and what about Barb and Kevin spoke to you as a playwright?
Thank you. I'm going to tell you, first of all, I think that the story hit me because I'm a mom. And I was listening to NPR in my kitchen, just kind of puttering around, and it was right after Argo, the movie Argo came out, and Scott Simon was interviewing Kevin. And at some point in the interview, he said, your mother was so brave to come visit you while you were a hostage, and I just want to let you know that I think that she's a real hero. And I sort of thought, I kind of stopped and thought, wait a minute, his mother visited him when he was a hostage? I'm not even allowed to visit my kid at school. I don't understand. And that doesn't translate into anything I know about the times now and hostages. And so, and then something in the way that Scott said it suggested to me that people didn't think it was okay that Barbara had made this incredible journey. So I did some research, and sure enough, and I discovered these extraordinary people, and I just really felt moved to tell the story, from that.
Barb, how does it feel to have a fictional character on stage with your name?
It was really unreal. When I was reading a brochure and it said, "Come and meet the real Barbara Timm," and I thought that it feels creepy. I am me. I am just a mother, a wife, and a grandmother who happened to have found herself in a place in history that I did not want to be. I would not wish it upon anybody. And, but it's very powerful. The part that happened over here on this play was so real. I would say almost to 100% was realistic on what took place. Over here, not so much. but the stuff that actually went on in Iran. And so watching that, and then probably the most powerful part for me during this whole play was when they tied his hands up and put the blindfold on him again and walked him away. That really happened. And that was the worst part of my whole time over there, was when they took him away. That really was powerful in the movie. And the actor who played Kevin, wow, he's really, really good. I gave him a lot of credit, yeah.
Any questions? Go ahead, and then I'll call.
Yeah, my memory of the events back then are that this played a really big role in politics in the United States, that I think Reagan partly got elected because he promised he had a way to get the hostages released, even though he didn't have a plan that he spoke about. Is my memory right about that?
Yes, on his rug, in fact, the very moment that he took the vows, the oath of office on the 21st of January, they announced on TV that the plane had left Iranian airspace. So that's the reason, that Reagan was elected.
And Kevin told us something last night that I didn't really understand about the hostage takers planning that exact moment.
Yeah, so my mom did not know that I was going to be here until yesterday afternoon when we met at a restaurant.
You were just released?
No, I'm still married. My wife and I and one of my sisters and two of my brothers came in to see my mom and be here and to see the play.
Right.
And she saw the play last year when it was first premiered in Los Angeles. And talked about it, and I knew I needed to come. I wanted to come. My wife and I had been in San Francisco, but Michelle's right. So we came last night. I was telling the group last night that the timing of it being January 20th, 1981, Inauguration Day, was the last insult to President Carter
Yeah.
by the Iranians, because they didn't want to give him the satisfaction of us being freed while he was still officially the president. And shortly after the new president put his hand on the Bible and took the oath of office, and you may remember this, those of you who are old enough to have remembered watching it on television, the inauguration, a split screen. On half of your TV screen was President Reagan being sworn in, and on the other half of the TV screen was the footage, the filming in Tehran at Mehrabad International Airport as we were taxiing and taking off. And they did not want to give President Reagan the satisfaction of saying, we're the ones who got Reagan and Haig and all the others, saying that he's the one who got us out either. So it was that last effort by the Iranians to try to exert their control, their pressure, their influence on the world stage once again. And we all know, of course, now it'll be 40 years in 2 weeks. It'll be 40 years from the day we were captured,
November
since the day we were
4th,
captured.
1979.
And so for the other 11 Marine security guards and the other 51 Americans who were held for the entire 444 days, it was the fear, it was the monotony, it was the boredom. I didn't quite catch it last night. I caught it tonight, and that's what happens when you see a movie or a play or even a conversation replayed. The statement that my mom's character made on the plane coming back, as she touched the seat next to her on the plane, saying, "This was the seat intended for me." While that was happening, or some version of it, however it actually played out in real life, my roommate at the time, Alan Golasinski, and we were discussing how the one thing that I personally would never be able to live with the rest of my life was going home on the plane with my mom.
And
Alan Golasinski and we talked about, this was before I even knew who John McCain was. It was before I knew what he had done in Vietnam as a prisoner of war. We both, to a person, knew it would have been a terrible idea. And it wasn't really her plan either.
It was never mine. I did
Right.
not go there for that reason.
Right,
I
right.
went over there for one specific purpose, and that was a letter that, well, originally there were a lot of families were supposed to go.
15 families were in Switzerland,
But
and they couldn't get their visas. She's the only one who
I
got
got
the
a
visa.
letter from a lady in Canada. That part of the play was very accurate.
Yep.
This letter, the letters that were allowed out from the pastors that went at Christmas time, and they brought the hostages some mail, not from their family members, just from strangers, and they were allowed to send a couple letters out. And this one lady in Canada, I never met her, don't know who she is, she called me and said she received a letter from Kevin. And it said, "I don't know if you'll get this. First of all, thank you for your Christmas card, blah, blah, blah." And he said, "If you get this letter, this is my mom's phone number." He said a couple of things in there. She told me that he was told that I had died. That was one of their ways of torturing them. And that he had said that he had attempted to escape, and he was put in solitary confinement, and that if he had a chance again, he would try to escape again, because he'd rather die than spend another day as a hostage. That said, I'm going. There was never, and I would never do that to anybody, to bring them home alone. Had the lawyer that was with us did try to negotiate with whoever, I don't know, to bring maybe a dozen of them home. And then Kevin being among one of them. But never, ever, ever would I have wanted to do that to him. Would I have done that to myself? Would I have done it to our country? And it was never in my thoughts and never in my plans. It was to see that he was alive and that he knew that I was alive.
So there were 43 days in solitary confinement after a failed escape attempt with two of the other Americans, Stephen Lauterbach and Sergeant Joe Subic. And we didn't succeed in our escape attempt. We ended up I spent 43 days in solitary confinement. The only time I ever got out of that room, it was a small 5 by 10 foot size room, only a box spring on the floor, handcuffed behind my back, blindfolded. The only time I ever got out of that room in 43 days was to take one bathroom stop per day on their time schedule and to take 3 showers in the 6.5 weeks. And it was while we were in solitary confinement, while I was in solitary confinement, that there was the mock execution, which people have asked me over the years, 40 years almost since we've been released, you know, is there a single day that was the most frightening day of all? And it would have been the mock execution, where they lined us up, dragged us out of our rooms, stripped us down into just our undershorts. They blindfolded us, handcuffed us with handcuffs, made us face the wall, and up and down the hallway of the lower level of the embassy building, where many of us, not all, many of us were housed at the time, they shouted out execution commands in Farsi at the top of their lungs. And it was such a frightening time that one of the other Americans, Colonel Dave Rader, was so upset. We were all scared, but so upset at their mind control that he shouted out at the top of his lungs, he cursed and said, "Just get it over with. You guys have been playing these types of games for 7 months already." And as quickly as it started, it was over. They gave us our clothes back, they put us into our rooms, took the blindfold off, and we got dressed again. And it was all about their effort to, so someone said, why did they do it? Because they could. Ambassador Limbert said because they could. And that is the reason they did it.
Kevin, at what point?
Hold on a second, because I had Barbara had a question, then we'll get you, sir.
Well, your life at home. You said the life over here was not as real as the life over there. Well, but there was a lot of unrest in your life at that time. Were you threatened?
Yes, thank you for the question. While I was over there is when the rescue attempt took place, and that was played out here. The rescue attempt took place. It was the day after I saw Kevin. Our attorney had said that they were going to take the hostages and they were going to execute them because of our attempt at the rescue. And then they were going to take me in and kill me because while in the beginning they let me see Kevin because they thought I was just a mother, after the rescue attempt, they thought that I was a plant from the U.S. government, that I was put there for all the cameras to be on me, and then the rescue camp could sneak in the back door and rescue the hostages. So the terrorists thought that I was a plant from the government. So he suggested that I speak, and I got a call from one of the hostage families, called our attorney and said, I want her to apologize for me and a couple of the other State Department families. I was scared stiff. And I kind of knew in the back of my head what would happen, but I also feared the unknown if I didn't, and that was the threat that they were going to kill the hostages. So I said exactly what the woman said here in the play. I apologize on behalf of myself and several other hostage families. I never did say on behalf of our country. Those words never came out of my mouth. But I did say on behalf of myself and a couple other families, I apologize for what took place. Well, when we got home, I thought what I saw in Iran was bad. We landed in O'Hare. I live in Wisconsin. We landed in O'Hare Airport, and there were just crowds of people, and there were a lot of police officers. And as we got off the plane, they said, just let us stay with you. And they just grabbed my arms, one on each side of me, and one on each side of my husband. And they escorted us through this mob. And with God as my witness, what I'm going to tell you is the truth. As we were walking through the airport, one of the journalists, don't know who he was, have no idea, but he yelled out and he said, "Mrs. Timm, is it true that you had to give the Ayatollah a blowjob in order to see Kevin?" God is my witness. That happened. Well, it's a good thing the cops were there to hold my husband back. Because, I mean, there would have been mayhem. And that's what they were looking for. That's exactly why they said such a vulgar thing. Because they were looking for reaction from him. But of course, we said nothing. But yes, there was a lot of hatred when I got home. I was in McDonald's with my youngest son, and a woman said, "Aren't you that woman that went to see her?" She just spit right in my face. I lived in Oak Creek for many years up to that point. My children were raised and grew up there. And yet, and you know, I got a lot of mail, and I got a lot of really warm, lovey mail, but that's not the stuff I remembered. I remember the ugliness, and there was a lot of it.
So you had a question?
Yeah, it's kind of a two-part question. At what point during those 444 days did your mother come to visit? And was it during the middle part of this whole thing? Or?
April.
It was April 24th, 1980. April 25th
6 months after.
was the planned rescue mission. And
But we didn't know.
So you had another how many months of captivity after that?
8
film?
months.
Eight more months after
Yep.
that.
From April till January 21st of 81.
Kevin, this was presented, of course, as a student uprising, right? Were in fact your captors, were they all students, or did the government
They were terrorists.
elbow their way in, and
so,
what were they like?
So the Shah of Iran was admitted into the United States about 2 weeks before the embassy was overrun. The ambassador, Bruce Langen, and a number of other high-level State Department officials at the embassy agreed with President Carter. President Carter was overruled by his own team. Of course, it was ultimately his decision that there could be trouble at the embassy for the Americans if the Shah was admitted into the U.S. He was a 26-year ally. This is in the context of the Cold War, the Soviet Union sharing a 1,200-mile-long border between their two countries. And the number one objective of the U.S. government during that quarter century was to work hard to try to deny the Soviets access to a warm water port in the Persian Gulf. And so Iran was our ally. And as it turned out, the Shah came to the U.S. for medical treatment. He was stricken with cancer. The Iranians believed that the U.S. allowed him into Philly for his New York and ultimately Philadelphia for his cancer treatment because it was, allowed him into this country to begin staging a counter coup, to reinstall him back in place of the Ayatollah, who had taken over the country several months earlier. And so when we were captured, November 4th, 1979, Marine security guards at that time at all embassies in the world, and Iran was one of the hot spots. The only weapons we carried were 12-gauge shotguns and 38 caliber revolvers. That was it. There were no automatic weapons. We did have a big stash of tear gas, and we delayed the entry of the Iranians, the Marines did, into the building for about 4 hours, at which point the decision was made, of course, by our senior level officials to lay down the Marines, to lay down our weapons and to surrender the embassy. All the other Americans who weren't on duty at the time, they were captured in their apartments outside the back gate or in other parts of this 29-acre indefensible sprawling compound. It was a student-led uprising, absolutely for sure. Masumi Ebtekar, the woman in this play tonight, in fact, every single leader in the Iranian government for the entirety of the last 40 years cut their teeth as one of the hostage holders. Every one of them. She went on and became the environmental minister. She went back and got her chemical engineering degree once the universities reopened. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, president for 8 years, he went to college with her at Tehran Polytechnic University. But the irony is, the Iranian military, which was really led by the Ayatollah, he blessed this event within a few hours of its beginning because he knew it could become a distraction for what was really going on in Iran. And that was already a lot of turmoil, because anytime there are a lot of idealists, and I'm idealistic even now about a lot of things in my life, you know, we lose faith pretty quickly when we realize that it's not going to come to fruition. In those first 8 months under the Ayatollah, it wasn't becoming up all roses for them. So they sent the Iranian army to participate in the taking over of the embassy and in holding us captive. And while everything my mom said is true about how she was treated back home, if you've ever received a hate letter, they hold sway over our emotions. I have about 80,000 letters in my garage and a storage locker back home. I've read every one of those welcome home letters. We are viewed as heroes for what we endured, what we went through. And the 30 letters that were out there that said, why didn't you shoot? Why didn't you defend yourselves? You know, you brought this on yourselves. You know, for me, I am a public figure. I've become a public figure, not just because of that time in captivity, but because of other things in business and other volunteer things I'm involved in my community. So I'm not swayed by that. I consider the source. I'm proud of my mom for having endured what she did. She has received tens of thousands of letters praising what she did, but those 200, 300 bad letters, they become scarring over time. And those are the ones that you hold on to.
Yes. This is for both of you. What are your feelings and emotions about what's going on with Iran today, the whole situation?
I don't want to discuss any of the political things. The only thing I would say about 40 years ago, when they let the Shah in, there was this big controversy. Should they let him in? Shouldn't he? I could have cared less if they let him in. All I was upset about was that they didn't close the embassy, bring our people home, and then let the Shah in. And they didn't do that, and that's why our people were taken hostage.
So I got
He's
my...
got thoughts, I don't.
So back to 40 years ago, I was a 20-year-old. I was 19 years old, serving in Okinawa, Japan, as a supply sergeant. And I was very privileged to get promoted very fast. I got promoted to the rank of E5 sergeant 15 months after I left for boot camp. And I went to a movie on the base in Okinawa. I don't even remember what the movie was, but as I walked into the theater on base was this life-size, beautiful color banner announcing a meeting the following night. And it was the Marines in their dress blues uniforms standing on top of the Great Wall of China in front of the Taj Mahal and at the Eiffel Tower. And it was an invitation to come to a meeting and learn about this program called the Marine Security Guard program that I had never been exposed to before. And I went to work the next morning, and my boss, I asked him if he had ever heard of this. He said, I've never heard of it either. Well, I'm going to go to this meeting tonight. And the next morning, I went back to work and I said, I'm going to apply for this job. It sounds like one of the most prestigious jobs in all of the United States Marine Corps. There are only 2,300 Marines in this program, even today, 2,300. And we would serve on behalf of the Department of State, representing our country in the capitals of the world. And I was so excited. I applied. I got in 179 people, Marines, men and women. My class was the first one that had women Marines in it. Just to digress for a moment, once we were captured, all of those women Marines were pulled off of their assignments and brought back to the U.S. and they went and did something else. And Marine Security Guards was not an open invitation for women to take on as a job for another 15 years. But when I got that assignment, when I graduated, only 121 of us graduated from that class out of 179. And I got my orders. I came home on leave. I told my mom, I told my brothers and sisters, all my best buddies, I said, listen, I'm going to spend the next 2 years in Germany at the U.S. Embassy. And this was before the internet, so I had to go to the bookstore and buy a German to English, German dictionary. I bought a big map of all of Western Europe. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I was going to drive 150 miles an hour on the Autobahn and go skiing in the Alps. And I got back to Quantico, Virginia, and the captain or sergeant major called me in his office and he said, Sergeant Hermening, there's been a mistake. You're not going to Germany. This was July 1979. Sergeant Hermening, you're not going to Germany. We accidentally assigned a Jewish Marine to be assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, and we're going to swap him out and send you there instead. And I looked at the sergeant major, I said, sir, forgive me, but I was a pretty good geography student in high school. Where's Tehran? I had no idea. And that night I went to the base library and I started looking at, remember the old microfiche you had to, the newspapers? I'm reading this and it's a revolution. I'm 19 years old, I'm thinking, this is awesome. I'm a Marine Guard, I'm going to go into the middle of a revolution. And when I got there, I got to tell you what, it wasn't the same. When we were captured, yes, the State Department should have closed the embassy before that. Today, I would say to you that in any negotiation, it takes two honest brokers. I'm not sure the Iranians have been honest brokers in much of a lot for the last 40 years. The day after the nuclear deal was signed in 2015, my friend Barry Rosen, one of the American hostages, the only State Department communications officer, Jewish, Columbia University for 30 years, retired. He had a nervous breakdown and spent 10 months in the hospital. One of the other Americans took his own life 2 weeks later. And his note was, we cannot be negotiating with these people at this time. Personally, I cannot wait until the day when there is what I would describe as regime change. John McCain, a lot of other Vietnam veterans, they went back to Vietnam eventually. I would love to go back to Iran someday.
Oh, no.
The morning we were captured, I told you this last night, the morning we were captured, my assignment was 6 months. The morning we were captured, I had been in the office and I signed an extension for 6 more months. I loved it there so much. Little did I know that just 4 hours later they would involuntarily extend my stay.
So I have a quick question for you, Michelle, and that is, what was the biggest challenge adapting this story to the stage for you?
Oh, there were so many. I mean, there was the issue of real people and wanting to write about real events, but also wanting to write from what moved me to write, which meant I was going to have to take some creative license, you know, to find that emotional place in the play. That was challenging. Trying to negotiate between Oak Creek and Tehran. I mean, from what I could tell, there weren't two places that were a lot more different, you know, and to try to find, you know, for the purposes of a stage, what links things together. And of course, it's not places that link together, it's people that link together.
And Michelle, I have a question for you. My son asked me last night, and I don't know the answer to it. How did you get my address?
Wasn't me.
No,
It was a different
one
son.
of my other kids asked me how did you get my address, and I says, I don't know. I just got a letter one day. I have no
Yeah.
idea how.
I just looked you up. It's kind of all out, yeah.
It's all out there.
I thought
On what, the internet?
Yeah.
yeah,
It's on the internet, it's true.
This internet thing is not a fad anymore.
yeah.
In the back? Go ahead.
My first question for you, I have two, is did you get to throw the opening pitch at the Bruce?
I did, and it did not bounce before the play.
Good job, Mom, you kept your promise.
bit. I mean, it was this story, Barbara's story, was not something that I knew about, or actually I sort of asked around, and a lot of people didn't know about it. But once I started researching, there were stories in the New York Times, there were stories in Time Magazine, I found video interviews, there were some documentaries. There's a wonderful book, I don't know if you think it's a wonderful book, but I read Guest of the Ayatollah.
That's the best, true to life.
Yeah, by Mark Bowden, who did Black Hawk Down. And I highly recommend it. It's a really fascinating read.
Guests of the Ayatollah.
Guests of the Ayatollah. And because I started being very interested in Barbara and a mother that would go to these lengths. And then when I read Guests of the Ayatollah, I started wondering about the students also, and wondering what it was that had driven them this far. I mean, there must be a reason. And then I don't know if I ever told you this, but I read an interview with you, and you said there must be some reason why these people are so angry that they would take our people.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that line, that was the whole opening for me to be able to write the play. Because to me, that was somebody who was thoughtful, and that as angry and as terrified as you must have been, it was amazing to me that you were able to think about the other side and consider that they had their reasons. You didn't have to agree with them, but that you thought that they could be there.
Yeah, and while some of them tried to present to me their reasons for it, they did it in such a negative, angry way. You know, we had to go to the cemetery, and we had to be shown and we had to be told all these stories. You know, that's not really what I meant. If I would have had the opportunity while I was there to sit down one-on-one with someone who really could give a reason, talk to me, maybe mother to mother, like the actor here who lost his son. Oh my God, that was so powerful. And I'm sure it's true that it happened. If I could have had an opportunity to sit down one-on-one, I would have liked that. But I never had that chance. Everything was just shoved onto us, and everything was so negative, and there's so, death to America, and so it was hard to understand their reasons. And I'm not that much into history to know, like he is. I'm not a history buff, so.
You just lived it.
Yeah.
Were it?
This right here?
So how long was your actual visit, the two of you? Was it 10 minutes, a
She
half
said
hour?
it's 45. I thought it was about 20.
I don't know. When I got in there,
I was already there.
he was there. I cannot honestly remember if you had a blindfold on or not at that point. But I walked in, I had two, and they wouldn't let my husband in because they thought he was a spy. Because when we were interviewed by the terrorists before we went in there, my husband was very belligerent with them. He wasn't, yes sir, like I was. So, when I got in there, he was there. We embraced each other. He whispered in my ear, we cannot talk about anything but back home, about the family and school, because he said this whole place is bugged.
There was a small sofa, almost a love seat size seat. I was sitting down. There were 30 TV cameras in the background. Back by the door, there was a coffee table and this huge, hideous, you said beautiful, hideous plant. And there were about 50 little teeny tiny microphones sticking out of it. And I said, look at all the mics.
You whispered that.
I know.
But there were, I don't know how many guards, probably, I say maybe 6 to 10, maybe less, maybe more, that stood with their rifles on us the entire time. They never took those rifles off of us.
That was always for us.
Yeah. So the whole time that we were together, were there 6 to 12? How many were there?
I don't know. When you came in the room, I was like, what in the hell is happening?
Right, yeah, like,
I mean, when
night.
they first when they came to my room to say come with me, I know that every other time that they had taken me out of the room, in which I was with another roommate, that it always meant something bad. Meant I was going to solitary. Every other time, 3 other times going to solitary confinement. Once the escape attempt, once and 2 other times for other incidents. And so when they came in, I was like, okay, what's next? All right, you know, you've got to get your back up. You've got to have your stiff upper lip. You have to be prepared for uncertainty. You really have to be prepared for the emotional ups and downs. And this became one of the biggest emotional ups and downs because I spent the entire time with my mom, that 20 to 45 minutes, truly fearing what was going to happen to her. How did she get in? Why is she there? How are they going to use it for propaganda? None of the things she was thinking about at the time when she made the decision to go, for sure, but it all became reality. And then, for me, all right, what am I going to do when I got back and talked to Alan? What am I going to do emotionally, how to deal with that?
And when I left, when he was taken away, he had slipped me a letter. And I hadn't read it until I was on the plane. And it was a short note, I shouldn't say a letter, a note. And it said he loved every minute of our visit. He's so grateful to see me. He hear that the kids are doing okay back home. But he says, but I wish you wouldn't have come. That haunted me from that day until the day he was released. Because I didn't know what he meant by that. And I felt guilt. I felt very guilty. And yet what the meaning on it was totally different than what my head was telling me it meant. Because he was put through all this emotional stuff on what was going to happen to me. And that still never entered my mind. But that was the reasons that he wrote that. But that haunted me for a long time.
Yes.
Michelle, first, I just think it is one for all of you. It's an extraordinary story. And a beautifully crafted play. I was just really... And I'm curious how much, so obviously you've all been in touch. At what process, in terms of the writing, did you reach out to Barbara? And did you wait till it was all done and said, hey, I wrote this play about you?
Not really.
So, yeah, I didn't really reach out until the play was going. The play was going to be produced. But to defend, or to explain. Well, there were a number of reasons I did. I mean, first of all, my background is as a journalist. And I knew, I did my research, but I also knew that if I went and talked to the real people, that I would feel a responsibility to report. Mm-hmm. And I felt that this story had been reported. And so it was important to me if I was going to have it was important to me to follow what moved me to write it. You know, that thing that grabbed me in my gut, thinking about my child, thinking about another mother and how far she would go, thinking about the conflict of mother, thinking about how that would feel to make that effort, right? And then to always wonder if you've done the wrong thing, right? As a mother, you're always wondering if I'm doing the right thing. And so I knew I had to write it from that place. Also, I didn't know if it was going to be any good. I knew I was going to write the thing. I didn't even know when you start a play and where it ends up, you never know where it's going to end up. It could have been a completely different thing. So I didn't want to get people interested or riled up, or even myself feel responsible to anybody, and then you never know if it's going to get done. And it's hard to get a play done, I'm so grateful that it's here. I'm so grateful that it's been having a little bit of a life. But I also didn't want to get anybody excited or activated about it. And so when I knew it was a real thing, when the contract was finally signed, and believe me, they were already in rehearsals, I sent Barbara a letter. And it was terrifying. Because I did realize the ramifications, and had Barbara or Kevin or anybody in the family been very upset about it, I knew that might be something that I would have to reckon with, and that the play might have to disappear. And I was okay with that, but I was fortunate in that they have all been incredibly generous.
Well, I got the letter from her, and I didn't answer it right away, because I didn't know she introduced herself to me, told me what she was doing, invited me to come and see it, to give her a call, and I held on to that letter probably for about 2 weeks. I went back to, because I didn't know, do I want to open up old wounds? Do I want to relive this? I was terrified that there would be media there, and I was never going to say another word to a media person in my life. So I went back home. My kids had a surprise birthday party for me last July. And so I went back to Wisconsin, and I had the letter with me, and I showed it to all of my kids, and I asked their opinions. And they all thought it was a beautiful letter, and it was beautifully written. And they all gave me the blessing to go ahead and respond to it. So when I got home, I gave her a call. It was about 2 weeks after you wrote it to me. And I gave her a call, and I got her voicemail. So I just left a message who I was, and then she called me back the next day. I think we talked for about an hour. And then she explained to me, she said, well, you know, this is LA, but it's not big theater. She says, it's little community theater. I don't know if you know what that is, she says, but it's very small. And I said, I know it is, because I have a son who performs in community theater back in Las Vegas. And then somehow they got in touch with each other, and then they came down. We went down and we saw the play in Los Angeles. It was wonderful.
I was so fortunate. Chris contacted me, and through Facebook,
Yes.
I think, and
The one who was in community theater.
yes, professional.
What about me?
Also a thespian. Also, I was like, oh dear God, he's an actor. Like, oh my God, there's an actor in the family. Like, he can explain all the things and help me translate that it's her, but it's not her, but it's kind of me. And Chris has just been a marvelous, just gorgeous, wonderful source for me and helped me to be able to talk to Barbara and feel okay about everything. He's spent more time reassuring me, I think, than
And they told me before we saw the play, when we were for dinner, we went out for dinner before the play in Los Angeles, and he kept saying, now remember, this is fiction along with truth. And they were afraid that if something, and I would say, that never happened.
Well, I
It's
said
foreign to me.
last night that I thought that most movies and film and plays were about people who were either deceased or were criminals. And but I have two daughters in theater, and so musicians in theater, and I've had the privilege of being in theater with them. So I know the dramatic license, and I do need to clear the air on one thing, though, Michelle. Okay. Back when I realized you were probably barely born when this whole thing happened.
not so much.
Oh, barely. Okay, barely. But back when I was growing up, the legal drinking age was 18. I never had my first beer till I was 18. So
I never drink.
and never.
I never drink.
and
Hold on, is that true?
In my whole life, I had about 4 wine coolers.
That's probably true.
And I'm 80.
So I asked Michelle where that came from last night. She said, well, you're all from Milwaukee. I thought, well, I was sure Laverne and Shirley were going to walk in right after that.
Well, you know, I wanted everything to come to a crescendo. I wanted all the worlds to collide. I wanted everything to reach a point, and the current husband and the ex-husband that seemed to me to be an opportunity for drama. And you know, I mean, I'm a playwright. I'm going to go for the drama.
They were never, ever in the same room together.
But you know, alcohol just seemed like a good way
And
to
I would
help
like to see
increase
that.
the tension. I'm
I
sorry.
would like to see that. I would have liked to see that.
You would like to see Why don't you take that, son?
Don, did you have a question?
Yeah, Kevin, did you stay in the Corps or what happened?
So the Marine Corps told us all the Marines. Some of us, our tour of duty ended while we were there. Some of us still had time left. I had 8 months left on active duty. But the Marines said, whatever you guys want to do, we will support and endorse whatever you want to do. And I had 8 months remaining. The college semester had already begun, so I decided to finish my last 8 months on active duty. They assigned me to Milwaukee. I worked out of the recruiting station, and I worked in public affairs, and I had the privilege of speaking in front of 425 of the high schools in the state. Some of the schools are so large that it took an entire day to do 6 or 7 different school assemblies. I have spoken in front of more than 700 Rotarian groups, Kiwanis, Lions, church groups, about 3,700 public presentations in the last 40 years. And I would say this, something that I've had the privilege of benefiting from, that my mom hasn't really benefited from at all in the last 40 years. The Marines were brilliant. They put me out on the speaking circuit. And my captain, public affairs captain, said, Sergeant Hermening, we're going to have a news conference. There will be 400 reporters. I said, oh, no, sir, I hate public speaking. And he said, no, we're just going to open it up for questions. And the questions that the reporters from around the entire world asked a couple of weeks after we got back, he said, don't embellish your story, don't make stuff up. Your story is already dramatic enough. You don't have to do any of that. If you do it, someday will come back to haunt you. And some of my colleagues, that is in fact exactly what happened, because they would make things up that didn't happen to any of us, much less to them. And all of my public speaking became a catharsis for me. It helped me to get that out of my system. Everything that happened to me was now detached from my personality. It's still part of my life, but I'm no longer known in most circles, except by those of you in this room. I'm no longer known back where I live for what happened to me. I'm more known now by what I've become and done with my life in the last 40 years, in all the things that I've done, and have been so benefiting to have been surrounded by people. And if I could, I finished my 4 years of active duty. I later re-entered the active reserves for 7 years, working in public affairs at the Glenview Naval Air Station in Illinois till they closed the base. And then they said I could go to Cleveland, and I said, who wants to go to Cleveland? So I got out altogether. I have 13 years total service, so I did not retire. My brother, very proud of him, my brother retired from the Army after more than 20 years. Last week, my wife and I...
I just want to jump in because you're saying that Barb never got a catharsis. Is that what you're saying?
It is. So she has lived with the scars for the last 40 years. My scars are way long washed over in my life.
I don't know. One of the things, like he said and I said earlier, is that all of the love, and there was a lot, the hatred wouldn't leave me. It just scared me. You know, I was afraid to go out in front of people even. One of the things that happened while he was in Iran, we were invited out to Washington for family briefings. I think they had a total of 4 or 5 of them during the 444 days. And I hated every one of them. They were like large cocktail parties. The majority of the hostages were State Department people. They weren't military. The majority were State Department. And they had these large cocktail parties. And I just wanted to know what they're going to do to bring our people home. So we had to sit in this room and we had to listen to these speakers tell us about how we should treat our hostages when they get home, how they'll probably react. They'll probably want to have a drawer full of underwear because they were denied clean underwear. If we find them sitting in the corner of their bedroom with a cap on or something over their eyes, we should treat them gently. This is what we were told. Nobody prepared me
for when this 21-year-old, good-looking Marine got off the airplane in his dress blues and his white cap, that all these teeny boppers were going to be following him around for the next 2 years.
It was pretty cool.
But that was, this is what the State Department told us was going to happen. I had no idea what a hostage would be like when they got home, and that was the reality of it.
But that was her reality, and it was her real life with me. Some of my colleagues, their parents have endured that. Because some of the people who had wives and children to worry about back home, some of those men who were older, much older, the eldest hostage was 65 years old when we were captured. There were 2 women hostages held the entire time. There was 1 African-American hostage held the entire time. Some of these other fellows and women, not the 2 ladies, because they had a great support network and they re-engaged back in their life, back in their world, or what became of their new world. But some of the guys, they became shells of themselves.
So long. If we were both to be honest, we would both probably say, I'm still not over it.
Talked about that last night.
Yeah, I'm probably still not completely over it.
It's true.
But like when he got home and all these teeny boppers were literally, I mean, all these, they were following him around.
Like the Beatles.
And, yeah, and I wanted him to be with us at home. You know, if that makes, I mean, he's
No, it makes perfect sense.
I wanted him to be there. I wanted him to talk to me. I wanted him to tell us how bad. I didn't want him to tell us the horrible things, but yet I did. And yet he was out. He was gone. On the nights that he wasn't
Out at schools, out elsewhere in the state speaking.
He was out socially, which he should have been. He was denied 444 days of his life, of his young life. He spent his 21st birthday locked up as a hostage. So while he was supposed to be out there, I wanted him home. It felt selfish, and yet it's what I wanted, and yet I didn't want it. It was all craziness mixed up inside of me.
It's like it's the essential mom story on steroids. Right? It's every
But
mother's story on steroids.
So
One
the
of the
arts,
funniest-
though, are all about bringing about internal conflict.
One of the
Right?
hilarious things in this
Emotion.
movie,
Yeah.
he had this girlfriend named Wendy. He married a Wendy, but he met her 8 months after he came home from Iran.
Yeah, and the crazy thing, when I met this Wendy, who's now been my wife for 32 years, she won't let me chase those teeny boppy girls around. I just don't get it.
One of the funny things about him meeting Wendy and building the relationship, when he had a hostage television network in their own home town. So we had they were there every day wanting stories. So Kevin's face was on the television every single day, all around Wisconsin. So everywhere he went out, everybody knew, oh, you're Kevin, you're Kevin. He could go nowhere, and they knew he was Kevin. He would go into a bar, and by that time he was able to go to a bar. He'd go to a bar, and all the, oh, Kevin. Well, he goes into this bar, or it was a nightclub, I guess, and he asked this girl to dance, and she did not know who he was. And he said, I don't know if I should dislike her because she was so uninformed that she didn't know who I was, or if that's who I want to be because she likes me for me and not because of the hostage. And that's my beloved daughter-in-law, Wendy.
So, you have to get to the airport pretty soon.
I have to leave here at about 20 to 6.
Okay, so we have time for a couple more questions. There was one yes.
Kevin, oh, I'm sorry.
I wanted, this question is for either or both of you, Kevin and Barb. Michelle's job as a playwright is to bring universality to the different players in this drama. She achieved it in the play, but was that going too far in truth? Did you ever find commonality, human being to human being, with your captors?
With the captors?
Yeah.
Oh, not me.
That's,
So,
but you were there for 3 days, and he was there for 444. So I wonder.
yep, it's a great question, actually, amazing question. So one of the guys who I had tried to escape with, Sergeant Subic, became a very sad situation because he didn't even have time to have become complacent and friendly with the guards. Literally, when they captured him, his degree of fear rose so high, so fast, that he walked around with the captors 3 minutes after being taken and identified all of the other Americans. This is Colonel Charles Scott. He flew 30 bombing missions over Vietnam. This is Colonel this is Colonel Schaefer. Colonel Scott. He speaks fluent Farsi and knew the Shah's leaders in the army. This is Tom Ahern, the CIA station chief. Okay? I didn't know when they put me in a room with him on Christmas Eve, the first of the 2 Christmas Eves we spent in captivity, that he was there to set me up because I was one of the more belligerent hostages. I would talk back to the guards. I wasn't complacent. I hated being there. In the entire 444 days, we were only outside. I was only outside total for 2 hours in 14 months. And so I hated being there. None of us liked it, but it was very emotionally difficult for me to be everything from tied up to inactive and everything else, as well as frightened and uncertain. Little did I know that every time they took Sergeant Subic down the hallway to use the bathroom, he was actually giving the guards an update on our escape effort. Little did I know they would give him fresh vegetables down the hallway in another room when they took him down to use the bathroom. Little did I know that he was able to make telephone calls to his girlfriend Allison over at the British Embassy, who he met long before we were captured. And I didn't know that any of what I just described to you had happened until we were freed, 14 months later. And all of the Americans had a story. Almost all of the Americans who were there with us for 14 months had a story about him. And he has had to live with the reality of having been branded the guy who was kicked out of the U.S. Army. He was denied the ribbon we all got as our service ribbon. And he was given a general discharge, not an honorable discharge. And honestly, my soul, the thing that kept me going, I did not want to embarrass my family, my service, or my country, and yes, or myself, in anything that I did or said or how I behaved. I never established a single friendship with any of the guards. It didn't mean that I wasn't so keenly curious about their motivations, their rationale, their religion. I wanted to, that is true, the way they characterized our being held captive. We were their guests. And Marine security guards are required to take 3 hours of language training per week. I knew I was going to be there for at least 6 months. I took 5 hours of language training per week. I went every single day. My college degree, foreign language, was Japanese. I did it when I was in Japan. So I was there. I wanted to immerse in the culture, the people, the language, and the community. And knowing enough Farsi worked both for an advantage for me as well as a disadvantage, because if they picked up on something that I kind of picked up on, they thought I knew more than I did. No friendships. I wasn't happy when I learned that one of the guards, so the Iran-Iraq war started while we were in captivity. 1 million men on each side died in that war. 1 million. And the guards who held us day to day were scarred when one of their best buddies and a guy who was a nemesis of ours, who took care of us and pushed us around and slammed us. We had blindfolds on any time that he would deliberately walk us into walls. He took pleasure in this. I wasn't happy when we learned that he died in the Iran-Iraq war, but I wasn't exactly remorseful either, because we didn't feel like we were guests at all.
We have time for one more question. And it looks like I'm going to pick on the woman behind you, who has not asked a question yet.
Now, as I understand it, you said that there were other families waiting in Switzerland to go and visit with the prisoners. How did you get chosen? And I gather that no other families were chosen. Is that correct?
There was, yeah, I never went to Switzerland. There was a group called Amnesty International. Now, this is my understanding, okay? They met with all of the all the military families at one of the family briefings. And there was this lawyer and some other lawyer people. And they said they're going to get this group of military families, not the State Department, just the military families. It was going to get a group of them together and go over to Iran to visit them,
But you
and
were
talk
not,
to them.
You were not part of that.
No,
She went to
originally,
Paris.
the original group was supposed to go in January. And my husband and Kevin's father, my ex-husband, were going to go. The women were not supposed to go because Iran doesn't like women. They were in New York. There was a group of about probably 20 of the men, fathers and brothers, that were in New York waiting for visas to go over there the very day that the news broke of the Canadians bringing out the 6 American hostages. The visas were denied.
It became part of Argo. That was the movie Argo
Yeah.
that characterized that event.
So that whole journey of those men that were supposed to go over there got stopped. That was no longer possible after that happened. So that was in January. In March, we had a family briefing, and the same lawyer was there, and he said, we're going to still plan on going over there, and we're going to include the mothers if they want, the wives. Quite a few of the Marine mothers signed up to go. One by one, they dropped out. I didn't drop out. I have to see Kevin. Some of the mothers called me and gave me their blessings and said they wish they would have been that strong. They wish they would have been able to go, but their family members wouldn't let them or whatever. And some of them condemned me that I shouldn't be going. And I didn't care what they said. I cared what he said or what he felt. So I don't know anything about the people that were in Switzerland. Those were all State Department families. And I don't know anything about how they got involved.
So the lawyer was the main organizer.
From Amnesty International. It's a group, I know it's a very liberal
Yeah, they
group,
all know who they are.
but I didn't care. They were gonna get us over there and that's all I cared about.
And everyone else just was too fearful.
That is exactly, apparently while we went to Paris, we had to go to Paris to get our visa. Apparently, and I didn't know this, but apparently Carter put on a ban, a travel ban for Americans to go to Iran because he had the rescue attempt plan. We did not know that. Nobody knew about the rescue attempt plan.
Did he know that you all were going?
Yeah.
He did know, and yet he had the rescue.
So you have to understand that these events were fluid. The rescue mission was well underway. There were 10,000 military volunteers for the rescue mission, which was boiled down to 200 within the first 4 months after we were captured, and 150 of them were chosen 2 weeks before the ultimate rescue mission known as Operation Eagle Claw. And so this team began to arrive in Oman and in Egypt and on the USS Nimitz in the Persian Gulf. This team was already moving forward. The commanders were already on the stations where they belonged, and then this mom shows up in Tehran. They continued the mission.
Because it was only one person.
Well, that certainly is in part how it was characterized over here. I don't know that element of it, but we didn't know about the rescue mission until 2 months after it happened. So my worry about my mom not getting out wasn't because of the rescue mission. It was like, why would they let her in? Therefore, why would they let her out? Because they have let her in, why would they let her out? They've got the rest of us here.
And so I imagine that the people, the State Department people that were in Switzerland waiting their visas, when Carter put on the travel ban, they probably all backed off. Well, my attorney said, we're going. Mrs. Timm is going to go. Travel ban or no travel, and I didn't know about the travel ban.
You were already there,
But-
partly there.
Well, we were in Paris.
You were already in Europe.
Okay, and then we got the okay to go, and we had to spend 3 or 4 days there, I don't remember how many, doing all their visits, and then the day I got to see him, the next day was and we had our plane fare to go home the next day when the rescue attempt took place, and they said we weren't going anywhere.
So we learned about the rescue mission 2 months after it happened. But all we heard was the fact that 8 men had died. 3 Marines and 5 airmen. Last weekend, my wife and I, we were in Washington, D.C. at an event, and I had the amazing privilege of meeting 6 of the men who were on the rescue mission for the first time. We were at this event, and I heard one by one these men talking about how terrible it was that they failed, how bad it was. And then it was my turn to speak. And I looked at each one and I paused. And I said, guys, I wish that I had known for 40 years that this is how you have felt. Because I'll tell you what, when we learned that you had tried, that is in fact what kept us going the last 8 months. You succeeded not in freeing us early. Yes, we had to spend another 8 months. But you succeeded in giving us that last vestige of hope.
You didn't fail at anything.
For 444 days, we spent time in captivity. For 40 years, I mentioned those 80,000 letters I have, welcoming us home, newspaper articles. We are viewed as heroes for what we endured, the hostages. There were heroes in the hostage crisis. There were 9 of them. The 3 Marines and 5 airmen who selflessly stepped forward and, as it turned out, gave their lives in the off chance they might have succeeded in getting us out early. Some of the wives came up to me of these men and said, for 40 years my husband has lived with the guilt and the PTSD of knowing that, of believing he had failed. If only he had known that you guys felt that there was an element of success in it, how different our lives would have been the last 4 decades.
There's another play here.
The other hero was a person who represented a lot of the family members. They've probably never told her this, but the other hero was my mom. So thank you all for being here. I have a plane to catch.